What happens when one of Hollywood's most unpredictable icons walks into a morning show expecting a warm conversation, and instead ignites a clash that leaves the studio on the edge of explosion? Before we dive into the full story, make sure you hit that subscribe button to talk flair, drop a like, and comment below, because what you're about to hear is one of the most shocking on-air confrontations The View has ever seen. It started like any other episode: bright lights, smiling hosts, the hum of cameras drifting above the audience. But beneath that polished surface, something was off the moment Robert Downey Jr. stepped onto the stage. A slow ripple passed through the crowd, the kind that comes when a room senses something unpredictable approaching. His smile was there, yes, charming, practiced, but there was a tension in his shoulders, a stiffness in his walk, like he was bracing for something he wasn't ready for. He greeted Whoopi. He nodded at Joy. He exchanged polite hellos with Sunny. But when his eyes landed on Sara Haines, there was a beat, barely a second, where the air shifted. Something unsaid. Something sharp. Sarah's smile was polite, but her eyes scanned him with a curiosity that felt intrusive. The conversation began lightly, the way these interviews usually do. Talk of new projects, his evolving career, his second life, after Iron Man. Robert handled it smoothly, letting his natural charisma carry the room. The audience laughed at the right moments. Everything felt normal, until Sarah leaned forward. It was subtle, a small shift in posture. But Robert noticed. Everyone noticed. "So Robert," she began, her voice still warm, but with an edge threaded beneath it, "you've talked a lot about your journey, about reinvention. But sometimes people wonder, how much of that is real, and how much is performance?" Robert blinked. Once. Twice. A slow, careful motion, like processing a question he wasn't expecting this early in the interview. "Performance?" he repeated, the corners of his mouth lifting, but not in amusement. Sarah continued, her tone steady, almost clinical. "You've been very open about your past. The struggles, the comeback. But some viewers wonder if the charm and the vulnerability are, well, another character. Something crafted. Something that fits the redemption narrative Hollywood loves so much." A low murmur spread across the audience. Joy shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Whoopi's eyes widened slightly, the way they do when she senses a train collision she can't stop. Robert leaned back in his chair, fingers lacing together, elbows resting on the armrests like he was settling into a different version of himself. His voice dropped a note, cooler, calmer. "Well," he said, "that's a pretty loaded observation." Sarah didn't flinch. "I'm just asking what people ask. Are we seeing the real Robert today, or the Robert you want us to see?" The studio lights suddenly felt harsher, exposing every flicker of emotion crossing his face. A faint smile, a tightening jaw, a flicker in his eyes that wasn't anger. Not yet, but something like disbelief. "You know," Robert replied slowly, "it's funny. I've been in this industry for decades, and I still get surprised by how confidently people assume they know my motives." Sarah folded her hands casually on the table. "It's not an assumption. It's a question." "That's the thing," Robert said, his voice sharpening. "Questions can be accusations wearing polite clothing." The audience reacted, soft gasps, shifting bodies, that uneasy sound of collective anticipation. Something was brewing. Something delicate and dangerous. Sarah tilted her head slightly. "I'm simply giving voice to what some viewers say. And I'm telling you," Robert cut in, still calm but unmistakably firmer, "that reducing someone's entire life, their struggles, their growth, to a performative act is a bit dismissive. Don't you think?" Joy tried to lighten the moment. "Well, I think we can all agree Robert is plenty real." But Sarah wasn't done. "Robert," she said, her tone dipping into something that sounded like challenge. "When someone is as charismatic as you, it's hard for people to separate authenticity from entertainment. Do you think people know who you really are?" A flash, quick, hot, undeniable, crossed Robert's face. This wasn't the playful tension that morning shows thrive on. This was personal. He leaned forward, eyes locked on hers. "Do you think you know who I am?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. And in that pause, the studio felt like a held breath. "I think," she said finally, "that sometimes public figures create versions of themselves that are easier for people to accept." The muscles in Robert's jaw tightened. He exhaled sharply through his nose, cutting through the silence like a blade. "You don't know me," he said, his voice low, steady, but carrying the unmistakable tremor of a line being crossed. And there it was. The moment everything tipped. The audience erupted in murmurs. Some gasped, Others leaned in as though witnessing a scene they weren't sure they were supposed to see. Whoopi's eyes darted between the two of them, hands lifted slightly as if preparing to intervene. Sunny shifted in her seat, lips pressed tight. Sara kept her expression neutral, but not neutral enough. Something about her composure only fueled the fire. Robert didn't look away. His gaze stayed locked on her, unblinking, unwavering. "You sit there," he continued, "and you assume you can dissect my life like one of your daytime talking points. But you don't get to decide what's real about me. You don't get to rewrite my story." A heavy silence fell after that, thick, electric, charged with unspoken history and unresolved tension. Sara inhaled softly, the faintest hint of emotion cracking through her careful exterior. "I'm not rewriting anything," she said quietly. "I'm doing my job." Robert leaned back again, but the calm had evaporated. "Then maybe your job needs a reminder that people aren't puzzles to solve on live television." The camera zoomed slowly between them, capturing every flicker of expression, hers controlled, his simmering. And then, in the midst of that tension, Whoopi spoke, softly but firmly. "All right," she said. "Let's take a breath." But it was too late. The storm had already formed. And the next question would decide whether it stayed contained or detonated. The room felt smaller after Robert's words, like the air itself had tightened its grip around every person watching. The audience shifted in their seats, caught somewhere between awe and discomfort, unsure whether they were witnessing a conversation or a collision they'd talk about for years. And at the center of it all, Robert Downey Jr. and Sara Haines sat with a silence between them so sharp it felt like broken glass. Sara inhaled. A small breath, but noticeable. Her eyes remained steady, yet something inside them flickered, annoyance maybe, or something colder. She straightened her posture like someone preparing for the next strike, not backing down. "Robert," she said with a gentle firmness, "I'm not trying to dissect you. I'm trying to give the audience a window into the real you. Isn't that why you're here?" He laughed. Not a warm laugh. A short, bewildered exhale, like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "The real me," he repeated. "Sara, the real me doesn't fit into your 10-minute morning segment." That line landed with a weight that rippled across the studio. Sunny's eyebrows rose. Joy exhaled sharply, almost a sigh. Whoopi leaned a little forward, lips pressed tight, ready to intervene again if needed. Sara didn't blink. "Maybe not," she said, voice calm. "But viewers want honesty. They want depth. And sometimes depth comes from asking difficult questions. And sometimes depth," Robert said, leaning forward, "comes from not assuming you've already got someone figured out." His voice wasn't raised. Yet each word carried the force of someone holding back a stronger emotion, something darker at the edges. The audience murmured again, more restless now. The camera operators glanced toward the producers, uncertainty flickering across their faces. Sara remained composed, but her jaw tightened. "You have an incredible story," she said. "But some people wonder if you've polished it to the point where it becomes, well, convenient." Robert's gaze sharpened. "Convenient," he echoed. "You know," she continued slowly, "the redemption arc. The comeback. The inspiring message. It fits perfectly into what people want to hear." He shook his head, disbelief spreading across his face like a shadow. "Are you suggesting my life has been curated for your entertainment?" Sara didn't answer immediately. And that silence, small, intentional, hit him harder than any spoken accusation. "Let me put it another way," she said at last. "Do you ever feel like you've become a symbol instead of a person? Someone audiences cheer for because they want to believe in transformation." There was something in that question, something deeper than the others. Not an attack, but not a kindness either. An intrusion. Robert exhaled through his nose, steadying himself. "Look," he said, "I've made mistakes. I've owned them. I've rebuilt my life, my career, my relationships. But none of it, was done because I wanted to be anyone's poster child." Before Sara could respond, Sunny cut in, trying to diffuse the situation. "I think what Sara means is that people look up to you," she offered, her tone soft, measured. "Your story gives them hope." Robert nodded slightly. "That's fine. I'm grateful for that. But," Sunny continued gently, "with that visibility comes scrutiny." Sara picked up that thread immediately. "Exactly. And when someone presents a polished public image, people naturally ask what might be beneath it." "Polished?" Robert asked, brows lifting. "Sara, my life wasn't polished. It was dragged through the mud, rebuilt from rubble, and held together with sheer will. I didn't get here by sanding down the rough edges. The tension swelled again. The audience leaned in. Phones were no doubt recording even though they weren't supposed to. Because moments like this don't happen often. Not with someone as controlled as Robert Downey Jr. Sara drew in a breath. "I'm not denying your struggles," she said. "I'm asking if the version you show now is curated." He stared at her with an intensity that almost felt like a warning. "Everything you see is the result of a lot of work. Therapy, growth, accountability. And if that seems curated to you, maybe you're not used to people doing the work." The audience reacted. Some clapped, some gasped, others murmured in shock. Sara sat a little straighter, her expression shifting ever so slightly, something tightening, something defensive. "That's not fair," she said quietly. "You're twisting what I'm saying." Now Robert leaned in even closer, his voice dropping into a low, controlled intensity. "No, I'm clarifying what you're implying. There's a difference." Joy raised her hands like a referee. Okay, let's all breathe again." But neither of them was breathing. Not really, because Sara suddenly shifted the conversation. "Robert," she said, "do you think fame protects you from criticism?" That question hit the room like a crack of thunder. His eyes widened slightly, not in fear, but in shock. The implication lingered in the air, that he was shielded, coddled, untouchable. "Protects me," he said slowly. "Sara, fame nearly destroyed me. It didn't protect me from anything." "Then why?" she countered. "Does it upset you so much when someone questions your authenticity?" He inhaled sharply. And there it was, the line that pushed everything over the edge. The audience reacted instantly, gasps, whispers, shifting seats. Whoopi placed a hand on the table, as though bracing herself. Sunny looked down, suddenly fascinated by her notes. Joy shook her head softly. Robert stared at Sara, stunned. "You think I'm upset because you're questioning my authenticity?" he asked. Sara didn't back down. "Aren't you?" He laughed again, this time louder, sharper. "I'm upset," he said, "because you're pretending that your questions aren't judgments. You're pretending you're seeking truth when really, you're pushing a narrative." "What narrative?" she pressed. "That I'm some Hollywood fabrication," he snapped, and instantly the room froze. The moment the words left his mouth, they hung in the air, charged and dangerous. Robert's breathing had changed, slightly heavier, slightly faster. Sara looked at him with a tight, unreadable expression. The camera zoomed in, catching the storm building behind Robert's eyes. "You don't know me," he said again, this time quieter, but far more wounded. "You don't know anything I've lived through." Sara opened her mouth, but Whoopi cut in, voice firm now, almost stern. "All right, let's slow it down." But neither Robert nor Sara moved, because the interview had crossed into something raw, personal, irreversible. And everyone in the studio could feel that another spark, one more question, might ignite a full explosion. Silence clung to the studio like a storm cloud refusing to move. The air felt heavy, humid with tension, as if the entire room was holding its breath in sync. Robert's last words, quiet, wounded, furious, still seemed to vibrate through the space. Sara sat across from him, controlled but visibly rattled, her fingers tightening slightly on the edge of the table. And the audience, sensing the fragility of the moment, didn't dare make a sound. Whoopi slowly lowered her hand, knowing the attempt to diffuse things had only paused the inevitable. There was no going back now. There was only forward, straight into the heart of whatever this confrontation was becoming. Sara spoke first. "Robert," she said carefully, "I'm not attacking your life. I'm not questioning your pain. I'm asking the questions people ask when someone becomes bigger than their own story." Robert stared at her as though searching her face for sincerity, or perhaps a crack in her calmness. "You keep saying that," he replied, voice calm but with tremors beneath it. "But you can't hide a judgment behind curiosity. You're implying I'm performing a version of myself." "I'm not implying anything," Sara said, a little too quickly. Robert leaned forward, hands clasped, elbows on his knees, not aggressive but intense. "Then just say it," he challenged softly. "Say what you really mean instead of wrapping it in polite language." Sara exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing in a thoughtful, almost clinical way. "Fine," she said. "Some people, many people, feel that your redemption arc has become part of your brand." Joy shook her head immediately. "Oh boy." Even Sunny looked uncomfortable now. But Robert didn't flinch. He just stared at Sara, unblinking, as if daring her to continue. "And they wonder," she said, "where the man ends and the mythology begins." The words hit the studio with a force that was almost physical. Robert's jaw tightened. His shoulders rose slightly with a breath he didn't release right away. When he did, it came out slow and deliberate. "You know what's interesting?" he said, leaning back again. "When I was at my lowest, when I was hurting myself, hurting the people who loved me, not one of you people," he gestured vaguely toward the table, "wanted to understand me. No one called it a narrative then. Everyone just called it a waste." The audience stirred soft, guilty murmurs. Sara looked taken aback, but she held her composure. "That's unfair," she said. "I didn't know you then." Robert's eyes sharpened. "Exactly. You don't know me. Not then, not now." He rubbed his hands together slowly, grounding himself before continuing. "You want to talk about mythologies? My mythology is built on years of clawing my way back to myself. Not for the public. Not for a movie role. For my family. For my sanity. For survival." Sara opened her mouth, but Robert wasn't finished. "And if people want to turn that into a brand, that's on them. Not me." For the first time, Sara's expression faltered. Her eyes dropped for half a second, small but noticeable. Whoopi saw her moment and jumped in. "You guys, this is getting really heavy. Maybe we should pivot." But Sara wasn't ready to let go. "Robert," she said, lifting her chin, "you're talking about survival. And I respect that, but you built a platform on your story. You share it. You talk about it in interviews, in speeches, at award shows. That's not something people invented. That's something you present." Robert blinked slowly, stunned that she had stepped right back into the fire he thought she was stepping away from. "You think I talk about my past because it sells?" he asked, incredulous. "I think you talk about it because it's become part of your public identity," she answered honestly. "And I'm asking if you're ever afraid of being trapped by it." That question, unexpected, oddly soft, almost compassionate, briefly broke the rhythm of the confrontation. Robert hesitated. For a moment, just a moment, he looked away. The lights reflected off his eyes, catching something raw there, something unscripted. "Yes," he said quietly. The studio froze again, but differently this time. Not with fear, with surprise. Sara sat back slightly, thrown off by his honesty. Even Whoopi blinked. Robert continued, voice lower than before, softer. "I am afraid of that. Every day. Afraid that people will never see past the mess I was. Afraid that everything I do, everything I fix, everything I build, will always be viewed through the lens of who I used to be." Sunny leaned forward, her voice gentle. "That's human, Robert. That's real." He nodded once. "But here's the part that bothers me," he said, turning his gaze back to Sara, locking onto her again. "When you imply I'm performing or shaping my story to fit some brand, what you're really saying is that you don't believe in my growth. That you think everything I've worked for is pretend." Sara shook her head quickly. "I never said that. But that's what it feels like," he replied. The silence that followed carried a depth the earlier tension lacked. Not explosive, but deeply emotional. Sara swallowed, and for the first time, she softened. "I don't think what you went through is pretend," she said. "And I don't think your growth is pretend. What I'm questioning is the presentation, not the person." Robert studied her carefully, as if weighing her sincerity on an invisible scale. "Presentation matters," she continued. "When someone tells a story publicly over and over, it becomes polished. It becomes the version people expect to hear." Robert's voice dropped to a whisper. "And you think I give them what they expect?" "I think," she said, choosing her words slowly, "you give them what you're comfortable sharing. And that's okay." A long, deep breath escaped him. He sat back again, this time with less anger, but more exhaustion. The audience watched the shift with palpable relief. But the moment of calm lasted only seconds, because then Sara added softly, "But earlier, when I pushed you, you reacted like someone who still feels misunderstood." His eyes flicked up sharply. "Maybe," she said, "you're not as healed as you want people to believe." The words landed like a slap. The audience gasped. Joy covered her mouth. Sunny whispered, "Oh no." Whoopi closed her eyes as if bracing for impact. Robert's entire posture changed, like every muscle in him locked at once. He leaned forward with a slow, dangerous intensity. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't presume to diagnose me on live television." "I'm not diagnosing you," Sara said quickly, but too late. Robert shook his head. His voice dropped, low and cutting. "You crossed a line." And the room knew instantly that the explosion they'd been waiting for was finally coming. The line had been crossed, and everyone in the studio felt the temperature shift, sharp, sudden, undeniable. Robert Downey Jr. leaned forward like a man who had exhausted every polite boundary he'd set for himself. His voice, when he spoke again, was quiet enough to unsettle the air around him. "You don't get to tell me what I am or am not healed from," he said. "You don't get to sit there and psychoanalyze me for views." Sarah's breath hitched, barely, but enough to show she knew she had stepped onto unstable ground. She lifted her chin, eyes steady, trying to hold her composure. "I wasn't analyzing you," she replied softly. "I was responding to what you were saying." "No," Robert cut in. "You were responding to what you wanted me to be." The audience murmured, the tension now thick enough to feel in the lungs. Whoopi raised a hand again, but Robert wasn't finished. Decades of tightly managed interviews, self-control, reinvention. This moment cracked through all of it. "I came here," he continued, "to talk about a new chapter in my life. A project I poured myself into. And instead, you dragged me right back into the past like it's the only thing that defines me." Sarah swallowed. "That wasn't my intention." "Intentions," Robert said, leaning in closer, "don't erase impact." Sonny looked from one to the other, clearly pained. "Maybe what Sarah meant," she said gently, "was that fame carries shadows. And sometimes those shadows follow people no matter how far they walk." But Robert didn't look at Sonny. His gaze stayed fixed on Sarah, unwavering, piercing. "You think being in the spotlight means you can dissect me like a lab experiment?" he asked. "You think because I chose to be public about my past, I gave you permission to judge how I've healed from it?" Sarah blinked, words caught in her throat. "You don't know me," he repeated. "You don't know what I've carried. What I carry. You don't know the nights, the work, the therapy, the failures, the rebuilding. You don't know a thing about the weight I fought to put down." The silence that followed was deeper than before, emotionally heavy, almost suffocating. Sarah finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "You're right," she said. "I don't know everything. I don't know what you lived through. I don't know your darkest moments. But I do know this. When someone grows, truly grows, they don't have to prove it. Not to anyone. That's what I was trying to understand. Whether you still feel misunderstood." Robert stared at her, and for the first time since the confrontation began, something softened. Not fully, not forgiveness, but recognition of the humanity in her tone. But then she added, too soon, too unfiltered. "And the anger you're showing now, that says a lot." The studio broke. The audience gasped loudly, a collective reaction that ricocheted off the walls. Whoopi's hand landed flat on the table. Joy muttered, "Oh my God." Sonny's jaw dropped. Even the camera operators froze. Robert's chest rose sharply, one deep inhale, one slow exhale. "The anger I'm showing," he said, voice shaking with restraint, "is the anger of someone tired of being reduced to a headline. Or a case study." Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm not reducing you." "You are," he said, "and you don't even hear yourself doing it." Whoopi stepped in, voice firm but not harsh. "Okay, this is real. This is raw. But let's bring it back to something constructive." Robert turned slightly, still tense. "I'm not here to be constructive," he said. "Not after being dissected like this." Sarah inhaled, but something in her expression shifted. Regret, perhaps, or the realization that she had pushed further than even she intended. She straightened in her seat, her tone quiet. "Robert," she said, "I didn't mean to hurt you." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared at the table for a long beat, collecting his breath, stitching himself back together. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, but cracked around the edges. "You did though," he said. The audience felt that line like a bruise forming across the room. Sarah's eyes glistened, but she kept her gaze steady. "I'm sorry," she said simply. Joy's brows shot up. Sonny looked stunned. Whoopi closed her eyes briefly, as if thanking whatever force finally calmed the storm. Robert sat back in his chair, the tension still hovering but no longer explosive. He nodded once, a small, almost reluctant acknowledgement. "Okay," he said quietly. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a ceasefire. The rest of the segment unfolded in a subdued, fragile atmosphere. Whoopi wisely pivoted the conversation toward Robert's new project. Sonny added softer questions, careful, respectful. Joy chimed in with supportive comments. Even Sarah stayed silent for several minutes, gathering herself. But the energy had shifted forever. Something irreparable had been revealed, not just about Robert, not just about Sarah, but about the delicate balance between celebrity and scrutiny, humanity and performance. When the interview finally ended, the audience applauded hesitantly, confused, shaken, unsure how to respond after witnessing something so raw and unfiltered. Robert stood, thanked the hosts politely but without his usual warmth, and walked off stage with a stiffness that told its own story. Sara remained seated for several seconds after the applause faded, staring at the table with a haunted expression. Joy patted her arm. Sunny leaned toward her, whispering something. Whoopi simply let her sit there, giving her space. But the damage, however unintentional, was done. By the time the episode aired, clips of the confrontation were already flooding social media. Fans argued. Critics weighed in. Comment sections exploded with support, outrage, analysis, memes, think pieces. Twitter, Instagram, and news outlets dissected every word, every expression, every breath. Some defended Robert's reaction, calling Sara insensitive. Others argued he overreacted. Some called it the rawest interview moment in years. Others said it was uncomfortable to watch. One thing everyone agreed on. No one would ever forget it. And as the dust settled, the question lingered across every platform, every thread, every debate. Who was right? Who was wrong? And what does a moment like this reveal about the price of being known? Before the world decides, I want to hear your thoughts. Was Robert justified? Was Sara simply doing her job? Did the moment go too far? Or was it exactly the kind of honesty television needs? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Talk Flair for more explosive, dramatic, cinematic celebrity moments just like this. Because trust me, this story is only the beginning.